Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining Synthetic Intelligence Forum. My name is Vic Pant. I'm the host of the Synthetic Intelligence Forum, and I'm delighted to welcome today to our forum three globally recognized, internationally acclaimed thought leaders and subject matter experts in the field of privacy and artificial intelligence. I'm very happy that they've joined us today, and I'm going to welcome them one by one, and I'm going to request them to start by introducing themselves and tell us a little bit about who they are and what they do and how their work really relates artificial intelligence and privacy. So first and foremost, I'd like to welcome Dr. Anne Kabukian to the stream. I'd also like to welcome Kathy Kobe to the stream and also Pascal Fortin. So maybe I'd like to just start by asking everybody, what work do you do that sort of brings you at that intersection of artificial intelligence and privacy? So Anne, how about we start with you?
Thank you very much, Vic. I served as Privacy Commissioner of Ontario, Canada for 3 terms, 17 years. And ever since that time, I've become aware of the essential need for people to know how information is captured, is processed, is digitized, is released to third parties, often unauthorized. You have to always look under the hood. So with AI, one of my concerns is that this kind of transparency and need to understand what's happening may not take place. That looking under the hood, because it will just be considered an automatic process. It's AI, it's intelligent, and that's what's happening. I'm very nervous about that approach. We need to be vigilant in AI, as in any other area, to always, I always say trust but verify. You need to know what the programs are doing, how are they reaching the conclusions that they're arriving at, and things of that nature. And we also have to ensure that unauthorized activities are not taking place, or perhaps not even authorized in some countries. The creation of crypto backdoors, for example, that completely annihilate end-to-end encryption. We have to fight this very strongly. It presents such a threat to our privacy, to our freedom, that there would be these crypto backdoors that would just basically, without any authorization from the individuals involved, peek into what's happening in the communications, the digital information. Your privacy go out the door. That's not a world I want to live in. So let's be vigilant and ensure that in AI, as in all other areas, we are in fact ensuring that we have some understanding of what's taking place and the conclusions that are being arrived at.
Thank you, Anne. That's a great introduction, and I'm sure we're going to dive into those topics and benefit from your considerable insights in all of those areas. Pascal, I'd like to turn to you. I know your background is in cybersecurity. You're an internationally acknowledged expert on the field of cybersecurity. Where does your work bring you at the intersection of privacy and AI in terms of an introduction?
Well, first and foremost, there's a big aspect of cybersecurity that touches this. Privacy, data protection, cybersecurity, those things do align quite a bit. So in almost 20 years of assessing technical controls and capabilities of organizations, I've seen pretty much every kind of data breach and overexploitation of data in organizations, public and private. In recent years, I've been more involved on the privacy side. I've been working with Sylvia Kingsmill at KPMG on the privacy by design ISO standard, ISO 31700, with the Standards of Canada delegation. So that's very interesting, and there's quite a bit of overlap between the two. I find the AI and machine learning aspect falls seamlessly within this because as a technologist interested in the engineering side of things, to me the issues with data protection and privacy in machine learning and AI are all one contiguous boundary. So it's not they're not different fields; they're just complementary to each other. So high level, I guess that's it.
Thank you, Pascal. That's a very interesting introduction. So I'd like to now turn to you, Kathy, and you also have a background more on the risk side and the risk assurance and compliance management side. So can you tell us a little bit about the work that you do and how that brings you to this space?
Yeah, so my role is in trusted AI is really to think about all the different dimensions of an AI system. And I think of it more of just not the models, but the full ecosystem that it operates in. and all the different components that are required to think about how both stakeholders, regulators, project sponsors, as well as users can trust it. And certainly privacy and having confidence that any data that's involved and the whole process of AI is really important in regards to building that trust. And so that's where I think I'm probably that intersection of privacy and setting up those governance and controls.
Thank you, Kathy. So I'd like to stay with you for the first question to our panelists. We know that the field of artificial intelligence has evolved very quickly, and the field of privacy, as Dr. Kabukian pointed out, has also independently, but also in relation to AI, evolved very quickly. So we see a lot of these social and technical expectations, social and technical progress and advancement in both of these fields individually, but also collectively. Of all of these social and or legal or technical advances, which one are you looking at most closely, Kathy, and why?
For me, it's been a technology that I've been interested in from the very beginning, and that is more of a digital safe or vault. You know, right now, a lot of the relationships between corporate or public entities with personal data is one-on-one relationships. And I feel that that model is not going to be tenable as AI proliferates and the use of people's personal data proliferates. Because be honest, the normal layman person just doesn't have the time or the knowledge to be able to effectively manage that. And so I kind of see a digital safe as not just a technical centralization of personal data, but that there's also, it's held by a third party that can act as a steward or a broker to help an individual better protect their data. And I think that's what we're missing right now. We have a lot of guidance and standards and public sector bodies that are trying to protect personal data, but I do think we need to have some kind of mechanism. So I actually had a great opportunity to visit Estonia last spring and got a personal viewpoint into how they manage their digital data. And one of the examples that really stuck with me was that in the city of Estonia, people who live within the city limits actually gets free public transit. And so when they go to get on a bus, they just show their digital card, and there's a real-time connection to determine whether or not that person lives within the city. But instead of the the bus getting the postal code of that individual, what the bus does is it just asks the central party, does this person live within the city of Estonia? And all they get is an answer of yes or no, because that's what they need. They don't need the postal code. They just need the answer, do they live in the city or not? And so I think that's where we need to start changing the way we think about privacy by changing the questions we ask and thinking about how that centralization or digital vault might be able to be used.
Thank you, Kathy. And I'd like to ask you the same question. So lots of socio-technical advances happening in the field of AI and privacy. Which one are you looking at most closely, and why?
I started by referencing the need for transparency and accountability, and for people to have some sense of what's going on. I just want to reference privacy by design. This is something I created a long time ago when I was privacy commissioner, but it's all about being proactive in terms of embedding much needed privacy protective measures into the design of your operations, your technology, bake it into the code so that it's not a fleeting occurrence, it's a permanent data protection model. Privacy as the default setting means that it's always there. Customers don't have to ask for it. You get privacy automatically. And this is what I would like to see reflected in AI as well, because there's unfortunately this sense of magic associated with AI that somehow it's going to know all the right things to do and come out with the brilliant solutions. And there will be many brilliant solutions, no doubt. But what we have to ensure is that the proper protocols are being followed and that privacy is being preserved in AI as it is elsewhere by design. This is absolutely critical. And I referenced the creation of crypto backdoors, which unfortunately are rearing their ugly heads again since the days of the Clipper chip some 20 years ago. And the problem is with AI, the ease with which you could hide that. Who's going to know if there's a crypto backdoor or not? Because you don't know very much about how the AI is operating and what what's taking place in terms of actions to protect your data as well as achieve the end result, which is desired. We can do both. Privacy by design is all about positive sum, not zero sum. It's not either or, privacy versus data utility or privacy versus security. It's positive sum, privacy and fill in the blank. And that's what we have to make sure takes place with AI. We have to have privacy and AI. AI can't just obliterate all the measures we've created in terms of end-to-end encryption and things of that nature, in terms of protecting data. We have to ensure that that prevails. And I'm somewhat nervous about this. So the whole trust but verify notion is critical here. We've got to look under the hood, make sure we know how the AI is operating, and that it does, in fact, strongly protect privacy and data protection.
Thank you, Anne. Thank you very much. And Pascal, same question for you.
Well, I'm going to put a slightly more technical spin on my answer. I think there's wonderful advances on both sides, and that there's a convergence happening on both the privacy and AI front. What I find interesting is the enterprise organization level interest in adopting things like differential privacy at a bigger scale. I mean, we see this with very large corporations like Google and Apple, for example, that have I don't want to say fully implemented, but let's say dabbled thoroughly in this space, and that's interesting because it allows better collaboration models for joint processing of data, and I think this is key. Is how do we have like industry-wide collaboration? Let's say in fintech, you want to do something. How do you bring all these people to work together in a way that data is going to remain secure, anonymous as much as is possible and desired? Also, technical advances in things like homomorphic encryption. Partial, let's call it fundamental, rudimentary homomorphic encryption has been around for quite a while, but like full homomorphic encryption is a lot more interesting. And we see multiple development kits that are coming out so that developers can actually jump in and start using those things right away. Now, obviously that requires industry collaboration and participation. So the roundtables and sharing between professionals is extremely important as well. I look also, because the security part is very interesting and important to me. I see things like Cornell's it's not advanced, it's ART, adversarial robustness toolbox, which is a kit that you can open source get and use in your projects, which allows researchers and developers to test things like learning poisoning attacks against their models, and really take it a notch further, because just in security, the last thing you want to do is assume. So, and same thing on the privacy test cases. There's a wonderful, brilliant researcher called Franziska Bornich. I don't know if we're pronouncing her name probably not. She's in Germany, Fraunhofer Institute. And she actually used the ART toolkit to develop model inversion attacks, which are very, very useful to analyze machine learning and AI setups and be able to identify where can we kind of fool the AI, fool the machine learning platform into giving us PII back, right? That's extremely valuable. So those advances, I think, are very exciting, and probably the audience is interested in learning about.
Thank you, Pascal. So the next question that I want to ask kind of builds on some of the answers that the panelists have given, which is that if you are a product manager or a platform owner of a software organization or a startup, and you're basically having to navigate this complex sort of network of laws and policies and regulations, I'd like to ask each of the panelists, which framework do you really sort of suggest or advise that you're looking at, or you propose to folks to look at? And I know, Anne, with you, as you had very kindly mentioned, you are the originator of the Privacy by Design, which I think is inarguably one of Canada's biggest contributions in many areas. And I remember when you had come to a previous Synthetic Intelligence Forum kindly to present a talk, you had talked about back then how you were adapting Privacy by Design to specifically focus on AI. And since then, I've followed with keen interest your website, and I've seen how it's evolved. So is it Privacy by Design? And I'd like to turn to you, or are there some others you're looking at as well?
The reason I focus on privacy by design is because it is such an enabler and it opens the doors to many other frameworks. The essence of privacy by design is all about ensuring that personal control on the part of the data subject is retained, which is what privacy is all about. Control over the use and disclosure of your personal information. And the fact that privacy by design was incorporated into the new law that came into effect in 2018 in the European Union, the General Data Protection Regulation. I mean, I was delighted that they included privacy by design and privacy as the default setting. They named these in the law itself. So it has grown dramatically. It's spread all over the world. It's been translated into 40 languages. And it just gives me hope because it works in complement with regulatory compliance, privacy laws that kick in after a data breach or privacy infraction has happened. But again, the goal of privacy by design is to be proactive and prevent the harms from arising, much like a medical model of prevention. And it works with whatever regulatory compliance areas are in whatever jurisdiction you're in. But ideally, it won't kick them in very much because you're going to prevent the need to enforce privacy laws. And there's been such uptake on privacy by design by private sector companies who want to be certified for privacy by design. So I've been working, and I'm delighted, I've been working with KPMG, with Sylvia Kingsmill and Pascal at KPMG, that they work with me to do the certification. So if someone wants to be certified, it comes to me. With their consent, I send KPMG in to do the looking under the hood and to ensure that privacy by design is being followed. And the beauty of this is I hear back from companies that have become certified, and they said, we love this. It builds trusted business relationships like no other. And right now, at a time when there's such a trust deficit, there's so little trust, this is a huge game changer, and it gives companies a competitive advantage over the ones who aren't doing it. And in the area of AI, this is needed times 10 because no one knows what's going on with AI. Very few people look under the hood or really look at how the code is developed and transparency. And as Pascal referenced, that German researcher who indicated that there's all kinds of ways that AI can lead to ultimately disclosing personally identifiable data when that was never the intention. So these are the things we have to remain alerted to. Privacy by design is one means of doing so, but increasing transparency, accountability, and ensuring that privacy is preserved through EI and AI and anything else that is being operating.
Thank you, Anne. That's a great response. And Kathy, I'd like to turn to you with the same question with a bit of a preamble. So I know you mentioned Estonia, and I also had the occasion to visit Tallinn 2 years ago, and I attended a talk by some government officials there who talked about exactly what you had described. And in fact, in their overarching strategy for IT modernization, not just AI, but all aspects of IT, privacy by design was very central and very pivotal to that. So Anne talked about that, and Kathy, now coming to you, same question is, in addition to privacy by design, are there other frameworks you're looking at as well that are complementary and supplementary, or is it also privacy by design you're looking at?
You know, I certainly think that privacy by design is certainly the center point of it. I've actually extended privacy by design to be more ethics by design when I'm talking about trusted AI, because I think that proactiveness of setting requirements up front is really important. And I've always been a huge proponent to say, don't look at this as a checklist, because I think sometimes these frameworks can be brought in and they're considered as a checklist. And I think what they should be considered as a foundational layer that then has you start asking smart questions. And so I like to try and think about how can you really enable privacy by design is by really having some really interesting conversations about scenarios. So what could happen, and really, you know, to really broaden out that perspective by bringing very different kinds of individuals into the conversation, those that are ethicists or socialists or psychologists or different engineers, to bring different perspectives and have people asking different questions. But what I do think is important to supplement to that is to thinking about your governance and controls, because that's where I play a lot, is to be thinking about what are those frameworks that you can use to really evaluate whether or not throughout the whole development process of AI, you've got strong controls. So I know NIST, from a cybersecurity perspective, has been relied upon very heavily, and they're working on an AI version of NIST. And then so I think those kind of frameworks, as well as the IEEE organization that is probably in a couple months going to be releasing out, its draft standard around AI. So I think there is a lot of initiatives that are being undertaken to bring some more standardization to the expectations for AI. And in particular, I think those are needed because so far a lot of the guidance has been more principles based. And so we do need to get into some standards that are I don't like to get too prescriptive because AI is such vast and it's still evolving, but I do think we need to kind of start moving beyond the principles into some real strong indications about what good practice looks like.
Thank you, Kathy, for that response. Pascal, I'd like to turn to you. And Anne had mentioned that you are working together at in your organization with Anne's organization, and also Kathy mentioned how basically taking something like privacy by design and extending it and making it, let's say, ethics by design. Can you comment a little bit on how sort of which frameworks you're looking at, and how you're augmenting or supplementing or complementing them?
Yeah, absolutely. So privacy by design and Anne's content is what we leveraged in the initial privacy by design certification, because there's a third-party validated certification body that allows us to do certification at that level. And but we had to operationalize it quite a bit as well, right? So we need to be able to get down into how does this interact in the real world, and how organizations are leveraging those principles so that we can do something that leads to certification. And interestingly enough, we were the first to certify an AI-driven organization, Integrate.ai, a few years ago. They were the first to market on this, and that led us to adapt the PBD framework with controls and topics around AI. So that's something that's been done. If you look at things like the NIST privacy framework, or even ISO 31700, which I'm working on, they're not AI focused. There's the notions are there, the principles are there, but there is no significant guidance on privacy controls, data safeguards in AI today. There is something wonderful that was made in terms of ethical guidance a few years ago, and that was with the initiative of Integrate.ai. It's called a Responsible AI in Consumer Enterprise. Anne was a contributor to that, I believe, and this is a document that is available publicly and has great guidance on how to get the right people around the table, what do's and don'ts and things that are highly relevant to anyone that's a product manager or that's in the space of machine learning and AI data science. So that's one thing. There's also something else that's coming up that's very interesting, and that's the Meter's contribution to privacy. So Meter, as you may know, with the attack framework and other highly technical standards and frameworks, is coming up with their own spin on privacy engineering. Now, within privacy engineering, we have ENISA, which is the European authority that did publish some interesting technical guidance, but I think Meter is going to take it to the next level. So for those people that are responsible for this, there's hope. It's coming. There's a lot of material, and obviously, there's some people with the experience in the industry to help out as well.
Thank you, Pascal. So for the next question, I'd like to stay with. For the next question, Pascal, I'd like to stay with you. This is kind of interesting. So nowadays we hear a lot about privacy, and we hear about surveillance, and we hear about people have different tolerances and different thresholds for how they sort of look at this in a trade-off kind of a way. So let's take the case of COVID-19. So we all know that various government departments all over the world, governments all over the world are trying to pilot these apps or to have these apps be launched for allowing people to know when they've been exposed. But there is a population segment there that is untrusting of these types of apps, and they feel like, well, if these apps collect all my movement information and so on. So there's all kinds of fake news and misinformation and disinformation. How would you advise, Pascal, for folks to, whether it's in an organizational setting or whether it's in a personal setting, to be able to reconcile this trade-off? I mean, for sure, there is legitimate concern on the parts, as Anne mentioned at the very beginning, that there are certain governments who are actually doing it in ways that are not acceptable, for example, in certain other countries. So how would you say, Pascal, personally, individually, or organizationally, folks to manage this tension between privacy requirements on the one side and surveillance on the other side?
That is a huge question, and I think actually Anne is going to be and Kathy are probably going to be better to answer it. But look, first, we tend to focus on the things that are the shiniest. That's human nature. So we tend to associate privacy with physical movement tracking quite a bit. First, it's just a tip of the iceberg. There's so much more to it. In the case of the COVID tracking, that's something interesting, because you have different levels of organizations, from federal, global government to a private organization, and they have different needs and different reasons to have and to use personal information for their purposes. And there are definitely ways to respect the citizens' rights in doing that. I look at the COVID alert app, and I think that's a fairly successful, very successful model in terms of protecting the rights of individuals. And then you look at on the enterprise side, and I think privacy led to organizations being scared to implement solutions where it was needed. So you look at in the food industry, where they have a lot of workers working in close proximity, they could have put in tools and capabilities to be able to track movements in a way that was not intrusive. But it goes back to the design, the purpose, and how you implement it. But you certainly don't want to have that level of granularity back at the federal government level, right? Because then you're going to run into potential problems. In order to address those things, I mentioned the responsible AI and consumer enterprise document. I think there's great guidance in there. It's about bringing people from different fields together. It's about also bringing people that are going to be, consumer or citizen advocates. And I've had to deal with this on the ISO standards development side for privacy. And just to give you an example, I had consumer rights activists that were part of discussions when we're at the global level. I can tell you those people make a lot of noise, and they do challenge us. Like, it's hard to believe. And sometimes, it doesn't matter whether who's right or wrong, but it's impossible. It's impossible to get to a good result without really deeply challenging each other. And privacy is not about just legal requirements of an organization. It's about principles. It's about the rights of the individuals that are the true owners of the data. And then that's where the conflict is. And that's why it's not second nature for organizations to be successful in privacy. I guess I'll stop there for now.
Thank you, Pascal. Anne, I'd like to ask you the same question of how you think folks should, in their minds, think about surveillance and privacy and the relationship therein.
I don't think of it as surveillance. First of all, you have to have both interests represented. Yes, we have a public health crisis in the pandemic with COVID. So people think, okay, we have to forget about privacy and just do massive contact tracing and all that. That's nonsense. It cannot be that zero-sum model that is unfortunately always embraced by governments, that we have to just forget about privacy, get everyone contact tracing and all that. Nonsense. I have lived through this through so many scenarios, back to 9/11. It was a terrorist crisis, of course, and it goes on and on. You have to get rid of the zero-sum mindset and do both. How do you do privacy and public safety? And you can do both. The COVID alert app that we developed here in Ontario that has now been used across Canada, the Ontario government approached me and they said, work with us. We want a very privacy protective app. And we did. We based it on the Apple Google framework, which was amazing. In fact, they don't call it a contact tracing app. They call it an exposure notification app, because what it does, individuals, so first of all, totally privacy protective. Apple walks me through the code on 2 separate occasions, because they know I always say trust but verify, and I never take anything for granted. So they showed me the code. It doesn't collect any personal information whatsoever. Your data are protected. You choose to download this app, and when you do so, it will alert you if you come within 6 feet or 2 meters of someone who has tested positive for COVID. Full stop. Then it's up to you what you choose to do with it. You can choose to go to your family doctor to be tested. You can go to a public health authority. You can do whatever you want. It's up to you. And that sense of control is essential to encourage people to use these apps. I remember about 6 weeks before all this happened with the COVID alert app, in Germany, one of the most privacy data protection countries and strongest in the world, they downloaded their app, which was also based on the Apple Google framework. And in Germany, their citizens trust the German government enormously because they're so strong on data protection. There was like 4.2 million downloads within the first 24 hours of that app, and it has grown significantly. I think it's up to like 20 million or something. So the point I'm trying to make is it can never be one versus the other. I reject all models that say you have to give up your privacy, your freedom, because there's a public safety issue. Let's address the public safety issue and preserve our privacy. We can do this repeatedly. See, the other thing that happens, and this is what I know historically, because I've been in this business well over 20 years, is once you have an emergency situation like this and you forego privacy in order to secure public safety and the measures involved there, once the crisis ends, it's rarely the case that those intrusions into one's life are eliminated. They're not. They continue. Surveillance model grows and grows. That's what we must reject. We can never forego our privacy, which forms the foundation of our freedom.
Thank you, Anne. And Kathy, I'd like to ask you the same question as well. Thank you.
Oh, gosh, I'm not sure how I build off of what Anne and Pascal said, because I'm in complete agreement with everything that they said. And I really wanted to pick on something that Anne said, which is that I think we have to be careful that words really matter. And to take something like contract tracing, which is very minimally intrusive, and to call it surveillance, I think does kind of bring this this inherent mistrust that somehow, you know, big government is now going to use this in order for other objectives. And I think that's where we really need to have that good governance and control, so that we don't have that, as Anne mentioned, where the intrusiveness, which was agreed to because of a particular situation, in this case, COVID, you know, just carries on, but it now morphs into other objectives. And, you know, then you kind of lose that original consent, and that's where that trustworthiness then starts to erode. And so I do completely agree with Anne that we do need to make sure that we are boxing these certain applications for what they were originally designed for, and letting them have their sunset period. And, you know, I think it's through that constant demonstration that there is that will to exhibit those trustworthy behaviors, is where we're going to see that trust build, such as like what it currently exists in Germany. And I think what that's going to actually have to build on is that we've got a lot of engagement and transparency, because I do think that particularly, you know, in Canada, we aren't a big fan in regards to big government making a lot of decisions on our behalf. We are a very engaged populace, and a very highly educated populace. And so I think that our governments should be leveraging that to ensure that we are increasing the education. I do think that there is a need for more privacy education, so people are informed, and through that being informed, they can then ensure that they are feeling comfortable. They aren't, I guess, taken in by some of the media that sensationalizes things, and can actually recognize the truth behind these kind of applications.
Thank you, Kathy. So I'd like to stay with you as we start the next question, because you just touched on something that is the premise for our next question. And, Pascal and Anne touched on this too. But, we hear a lot about when there are breaches. We hear a lot about when there are these thefts of data, and then it turns out that those data were in fact either unencrypted or what have you. Why is it that we always hear about a lot of these negative types of outcomes? And in fact, as Anne and Pascal and yourself mentioned, that there are a lot of organizations who do get privacy right in the context of IT more generally, but also in the context of AI, perhaps, in part through that certification that Pascal and Anne had mentioned. So, Kathy, how would you say that how is it that these stories are mostly negative that we hear about in the mainstream media and the popular press? And also, what can be done in the industry to create more of an awareness of some of the success stories around privacy and AI?
Well, I think it's just an unfortunate, of human nature that we do tend to actually remember and respond much heavily to negative stories than we do positive stories. But I do think that what is important to recognize is that trust still is the foundation of which we make decisions. And as much as we may respond negatively to these sensationalized stories, we are going to move forward towards organizations and relationships of which there is a foundation of trust. And so I do think that even though we might not have as much positive stories, we are all looking for those entities that we feel that we can trust. And we are going to magnify our relationships. And I think over time, you're going to find that with given the choice, and I think one of the issues we have right now is that we do have some large social media type of organizations that we don't have a lot of choice, but I think we need to create some more trust and choice so that people will actually start to move towards those organizations that they feel more trustworthy. And so I do think we need to be kind of thinking about how we can exhibit those kind of trustworthy behaviors and make them more open. So I think the privacy by design certifications and other certification models that are starting to come out are going to be really important, because we need to have some of those third-party independent signals to users as to who can be trusted and who can't.
Thank you, Kathy. And I'd like to turn to you next, because you also mentioned that you've been tracking this topic for almost 20 years. And we know, as Kathy mentioned, and that, if it bleeds, it leads kind of mentality. So what is the best way to showcase some of the successes that organizations have shown in this area of privacy and AI?
That's a very good question. In fact, what I might do is approach Sylvia and Pascal later to see how we can find a way to really celebrate all of the companies who have obtained privacy by design certification. Because what that would do is it will show companies that privacy is not against anything. It's not against data utility. It's not opposed to security. I give a lot of talks to boards of directors and executives. And until they know about privacy by design, when I go in there, they're always sort of a little nervous and hedgy. And oh my God, she's going to talk about privacy and it's going to reduce our business model. No, it's not. And I always say to them, give me 20 minutes. Let me explain to you how you can embed privacy to enhance your operations and work side by side with what you're offering. Then they love it. It turns things around dramatically. So part of the problem is the perceptions on the part of many companies and a misunderstanding that privacy is somehow going to impede their operations. It will do the exact opposite. And I show them how. There's all kinds of ways to demonstrate the enormous benefits of privacy by design, hand in hand with your business model, with whatever it is you're trying to extend. So communication is essential, education, people understanding why we need to do this and how it won't hinder you, will benefit you, but also at a societal level, why privacy and freedom is so important. It's critical. The crazy blue sky thinking, the innovation that is spurred by people being able to work privately. And, there's all kinds of crazy ideas you might throw out, and then you get the brilliant ideas. I always love to give the story of Steve Jobs, the brilliant creator of Apple. He used to buy a new white Mercedes, same make and model, every 6 months, less a day. He would take his existing model in, trade it in for a new one. And you think, why would he do that? Because at that time in California, you had up to 6 months before you had to have a license plate attached to your car. You didn't want a license plate number. You didn't want to be track surveillance. So he kept doing this and driving without a license plate. Unfortunately, after he died, they changed the law, and you have to do it much more quickly. But it just gives you an idea that the crazy blue sky thinkers, the people who create and innovate, they embrace privacy because they want to be able to develop ideas freely and then show it to the world. Privacy and business interests go hand in hand.
Thank you, Anne. And I'd like to ask you the same question, Pascal.
Well, as the cybersecurity guy, I guess I'm a little tainted on that one. Look, we hear about extremely egregious, very bad things that happen, right? We hear about the sensational security failures in the same way that in the news we hear about murderers and people that should do huge Ponzi schemes. We don't necessarily hear about like the people that ate the law-abiding citizens and the minor offenses. So look, people have a very biased, not realistic perspective of what's going on in privacy, what's going on in AI, there is a huge amount of the information that is not known and shared. The reality is there are probably hundreds more times the number of large-scale private information data processors out there than even the regulators know about. So if it's not hundreds, it's thousands. So it's just the unknown. We know about the tip of the iceberg, the legitimate tip of the iceberg, and in terms of incidents, there's another iceberg that's covering off only a little tiny piece of that iceberg. So it's pretty bad. If we didn't have the Cambridge Analytica scandal come out, they'd still be out there. And you know what? There are equivalent things out there now. And most of the time, private citizens just don't know about them. And a lot of times, I've been, and my teams have been involved in assessing things that I don't agree with, but I can't talk about it because I'm under a contract not to do so. And whether those were governments or private organizations, I can't even tell. But there's a lot more going on than we know. So transparency, we are very, very far from achieving that milestone. You're celebrating the wins, like Anne mentioned, I think is important and valuable. At the same time, it doesn't necessarily make you immune to a security incident, right? No one is immune. There's the responsible response to an incident is I guess what I would use as to judge the situation more than the fact that it was an issue or not. Yeah, this is a complex question again, but it's very obvious to me that we will not hear about what's going on in the day-to-day world because it's not indexed anywhere. There's no registry of people processing data, sensitive data or not. And that would be very curious. Yeah.
Thank you, Pascal. So what I'd like to do next is to maybe start wrapping up because there's a number of interesting comments and questions that folks are asking. So I'll maybe synthesize a question based on what I'm hearing. And Kathy, I'd like to turn to you for the next question. We hear about all modern organizations nowadays. They claim that they have compliance officers, they have legal specialists who focus on monitoring and governance and making sure that everything that their AI systems do is proper and privacy protected. And security safeguards are in place, but it's the data scientists, it's the machine learning engineers, the software engineers, the computer programmers who are the ones who are training these models, putting them into production, maintaining them, sustaining them. So in your experience in working with organizations all over the world, what would you advise business leaders, decision makers in organizations that have these teams? How can they communicate effectively and frictionlessly? How can these teams of legal experts as well as the technical folks work together in a way that gets the technical goals met and then also the risk minimization and privacy goals met as well?
So I think there's not going to be one solution. By far, I think the first thing to do is to really try to cross-train all those different groups. So you want the data scientists to have a better understanding of the broader regulatory, legal, and ethical, requirements of corporations, particularly when you think about the data science discipline, where a lot of the data scientists have spent a lot of time in academia, which can have different attributes and assertions that they're trying to meet, as opposed to maybe corporate or public sector requirements. But also, too, I think we have to be realistic that you're never going to be able to fully educate them in these discipline areas. And so what you want to think about is how can you have a more integrated team from the very start? And that's where I think, something like privacy by design or ethics by design can really kind of bring those regulatory and legal and privacy experts to the design table for AI. Because currently right now, I think a lot of the data scientists want to just kind of develop their AI model and algorithm and only bring those at the tail end of a project. And usually what I find is actually they are, unfavorably surprised to find out that there's a number of these requirements that they have not built into the model, and they've actually got to go back and reiterate and redesign and train the models. Whereas if they'd had all that information up front, they could have a much better design and much quicker, because they're getting stalled in being able to put their algorithms into production. And so I think it's really important to kind of invite all those different disciplines to have those conversations up front and to really get all those requirements onto the table. And because that can, I think, really drive a lot of the design and architecture decisions.
Thank you, Kathy. Pascal, same question for you: is how would you advise teams on the legal side and on the software side to work frictionlessly together to achieve both sets of goals?
I think it's going to be different depending on which type of organization you are. If you're a large enterprise and you have projects or products that are specifically geared towards creating machine learning, AI technologies with ethical and or privacy legal requirements, I like to see a hub and spokes model where you have these global ethical decisions sort of made at the organizational level, and then you have people that can bring that expertise into the projects, and as Kathy mentioned, from the get-go, so that we have privacy by design. We don't have bolt-on privacy. We don't have ethical considerations that after the fact that where we invested and developed and produced something and then need to go back and change it. I'll point back to that document again that I mentioned, which is the responsible AI and consumer enterprise. I think there's a lot of great guidance in there in the privacy by design framework, whether it's ANDS or the KPMG version or the upcoming ISO 31700. There's a lot of guidance around how to involve the right groups at the right time in order to get this done. I think I'll stop there and let Anne surf on this.
Thank you, Pascal. Anne, over to you.
Thank you. The one thing I want to remind everyone is it's not an either or, it's not a win-lose proposition. We have to find ways to accommodate multiple interests, and we can do this. The other thing I want to say is because so many people are getting discouraged these days, they're saying, oh my God, surveillance is mounting. It's impossible to get a handle on this. We have to give up on privacy, utter nonsense. You don't, but I understand the sentiment. What I want to ask people to do is forget about the odds. Don't look at the odds of success of something. I've achieved so many gains in situations that have been, unbelievably unlikely to succeed. And I say that because we need to believe in the importance of preserving privacy, embedding it into technology and into AI. This is critical. AI is the future, there's no question. So it's essential we get a handle on it now. How can we embed privacy into AI that works hand in hand with functionality, whatever the AI is intended to achieve? We can do this. We are doing it, but it requires transparency, it requires accountability, and it requires an understanding of how, yes, we can do both. And I'm not saying it's an easy thing to do, but it is eminently doable. And point to all the examples that have achieved success in preserving AI as an ethical model by which to move forward, by preserving privacy and data utility and whatever functions the AI is intended to perform. So never give up on privacy. We can always make it work hand in hand with whatever we're working on. In this case, AI, and ethics is critical.
Thank you, Anne. Those are indeed very wise words with which for us to close our session today. I want to really thank our panelists for making time in their busy schedules. We have lots of great comments, lots of great questions in the chat. We won't have the time to cover all of them. So I'd like to say we'd love to have you back in a couple of months to be able to share maybe an updated landscape of AI and privacy. But on behalf of the Synthetic Intelligence Forum, I'd like to thank you, Anne and Kathy and Pascal, for making your time in your busy schedules to share your deep insights with our community of professionals and practitioners. So thank you very much and have a good rest of your day. Bye for now.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks, Vic.